Good afternoon again, delegates. It's now 3 p.m. We would like to get started with the afternoon's agenda items and discussions. So we ask you to kindly take your seats. And so during the presentation of agenda item 4 on the terms of reference for the replenishment study, we did move a bit quickly with that agenda item. It has been brought to the co-chair's attention that one delegation was trying to make an intervention on agenda item 4, but unfortunately it did not register here at the podium. And so before we move on to the discussions for the afternoon, if parties agree, we would like to return to agenda item 4 to allow the Indian delegation to make an intervention on agenda item 4. I see that Kuwait is asking for the floor. So prior to the Indian delegation making their intervention, I'll allow Kuwait to take the floor. Kuwait, may I ask if this is in direct relation to the statement to be made by India? Okay, Kuwait, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. As my delegation take the floor for the first time, I would like to thank the host country and the Ozone Secretariat for organizing this meeting. I just want to say that even Kuwait want to take the floor when you close it, so it was not just in India. I know other delegation want also to take the floor at that time, but because you indicate that our understanding, our interpretation of your statement is just opening the floor for India delegation. So we hope that you take in consideration that Kuwait also need to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuwait. And again, I wish to extend my apologies to all delegations, as we did not see any request for the floor registered here at the podium. I also see Saudi Arabia is asking for the floor, so I beg the delegation of India's indulgence while we allow the delegation of Saudi Arabia to take the floor, and then I'll proceed with proposing a way forward. So Saudi Arabia, you have the floor.
السلام عليكم شكرا سعادة الرئيس المشاركة.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I would like to back what was just said by Kuwait as far as the terms of reference of the study of the fund is concerned. The fund from 2027 to 2029. It behooves us to say that this doesn't only apply to the obligations related to HFCs. We have to reach agreement on all of the various elements, including Resolution 28, result of Conference 28. The same applies to financing. Financing granted to developing states, which must be granted on an equal footing. We are moving or exiting a very difficult period, and even the Resolution 28 too includes a number of guidelines, clear guidelines. Well, despite this, discussions within the committee regarding legal obligations have a need to be taking place. Now, as far as financial commitments are concerned, all of this needs to be adopted to enable us to cover the period from 2025 to 2027. Secondly, the parties. As I was saying, the parties are discharging their commitments in terms of the Kigali Agreement, and efforts in this field need to be encouraged, and it will require the necessary financing. to ensure that our objectives, our agreed objectives, are actually achieved. Secondly, compliance not only applies to legally binding commitments, but also to compliance over the longer term. Fourthly, we back all of the proposals regarding states facing increasing temperatures. We also back not including new proposals covering the period 2025 through to 2027. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, distinguished delegates from Saudi Arabia. So I just want to clarify once again, there were no speakers registered here at the podium, so we apologize for intervention on this agenda item. I now see that there are 2 other delegates wishing to take the floor. What I am proposing is that the distinguished delegate from India be allowed to take the floor because we had agreed that they would be allowed to take the floor, and then thereafter we would ask that the other countries that have interventions to make on this issue, you can make your interventions, taking into account though that this issue will be discussed further in the contact group. So if there are no objections to this way forward, I'd like the Indian delegation to take the floor. And then on my list, I have the United States, Lebanon, Kuwait, and Bahrain. So I'd like to give the floor to India at this time.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. At the outset, please accept our apologies for not being able to extend our acknowledgement during our initial interventions, considering the time constraint. So, Madam Co-Chair, we would like to take this opportunity to extend our appreciation for the wonderful hospitality of Government of Kenya and for hosting us in this beautiful biodiversity-rich country. We would also like to acknowledge all the help extended by the Ozone Secretariat for organization of this meeting and for coordinating it so well. Now coming to Agenda 4 on TOR for the study on replenishment of the multilateral fund, Madam Co-Chair. Extensive discussions had been held in the Executive Committee, including in the 3 informal half-day sessions on the challenges for Article 5 countries in implementing a sustainable HFC phase down. Madam Co-Chair, HFC phase down has several challenges, some of them very different and significant compared to the previous ODS phase out challenges. For example, use of flammable refrigerants is an issue which affects industry and consumers using refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump appliances. It is understood that even non-Article 5 countries are facing challenges in adopting these technologies. Energy efficiency improvements in the context of cooling applications also needs to be fully addressed as they have indirect impact on achieving compliance with Kigali Amendment targets. Madam Co-Chair, life cycle refrigerant management also needs to be addressed holistically, that is from the design and manufacture of equipment with reduced leakage to the recovery, reclamation, and cost-effective disposal of refrigerants. While the HFC phase-down schedules provide time-based target, it is essential to maintain the overarching principle of achieving sustained reductions in HFC consumptions and emissions. This principle should guide the nature and scope of support provided to Article 5 countries. Madam Co-Chair, with the Executive Committee having created funding windows for activities agreed under the Decision 28-2, like energy efficiency, including revolving funds, inventories of unwanted refrigerants, it is important that RTF also considers the associated cash flow needed for the funding windows. It is also important that the cash flow patterns from the multilateral fund to the agencies must be carefully examined while presenting the replenishment needs. This also should take into account the long-term sustainable cooling strategy that would reduce dependence on HFC and not just immediate targets. We would be happy to discuss further on the above issues during the contact group. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, distinguished delegate from India. We now have the United States, followed by Lebanon, Kuwait, and Bahrain. We would like to close the list on this agenda item. So if there are any parties that wish to say something, please indicate now. Otherwise, we'll be closing the list. So United States, we have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I'll be brief. I don't actually want to speak on this issue. As you've suggested, we'll take up our views in the contact group. I did just want to indicate, because procedurally, I'm not sure exactly how we ended the morning session, just to say we still had not a question but statements related to HFC 23, and I just want to indicate we still want to make those comments. We're happy to do that later in the meeting when you come back to the CRP that Canada referred to, but we would want to make those prior to the introduction of the CRP. That's it, just a small process point. Thank you.
Thank you, USA. Noted. I now hand the floor to Lebanon. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As this is the first time my delegation takes the floor, we would like to begin first by expressing our sincere appreciation to the Ozone Secretariat for the excellent organization of this meeting and for its continued support for the parties under the Montreal Protocol. We also extend our deep appreciation to the government and people of Kenya for their warm hospitality and excellent arrangements for hosting this important meeting. Several views have been expressed on the challenges being faced by Article 5 parties in the implementing of the HFC phase-down, and this delegation supports the earlier interventions, emphasizing the need for stable, sufficient, and predictable funding to ensure a sustainable and equitable phase-down under Kigali Amendment. Following the discussions during the informal sessions that were held prior to the last 3 EXCOM meetings, certain key elements were identified in Decision 96/57, on which the MLF Secretariat is preparing a paper. It's important that the TIAP consider these elements when estimating the funding requirement for the 2027-2029 period, even though the modalities for support will be discussed and finalized at the EXCOM. The importance of digital and artificial intelligence assisted tools were adequately highlighted during the informal discussions held before the recent EXCOM meetings. Such tools will play a central role in ensuring transparent, efficient, and data-driven implementation of the HFC phase-down in A5 countries, supporting automated licensing systems, quota management, and real-time data verification. While the modalities for the operationalization of these could be discussed at the EXCOM, it's important that TIAP includes provision of the same in the 2027-2029 replenishment as well. This allows Article 5 parties to strengthen institutional systems, improve coordination among relevant agencies, and ensure long-term compliance with Kigali Amendment. Furthermore, many A5 parties continue to face challenges in accessing and adopting low GWP technologies, including cost, market readiness, and servicing needs. It's therefore important that TIAP to consider adequate provision for regional cooperation and outreach programs, including technology, roadshows, and demonstration activities to support safe and efficient transition to sustainable alternatives. Lastly, considering the significant reduction in the PMU's fundings under the Kigali implementation plans, there is a need to take a closer look at institutional strengthening funding for A5 countries. Even though a review of the IS funding is foreseen, the expanding scope of work of national ozone units, particularly with respect to data management, digital reporting, and stakeholder coordination, calls for the ensuring that IS resources remain sufficient with national implementation needs. Our delegation considers that the success of the HFC phase-down will depend not only on access to low GWP technologies, but also on predictable funding, digital readiness, and institutional capacity. It's therefore important that the TIAP, in preparing their study for the 2027-2029 replenishment, to give due consideration to these evolving priorities to ensure that all A5 parties are equipped to sustain the achievements of the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lebanon. We now have Kuwait, Bahrain, Malaysia, and Bangladesh. The list is now closed, and I would just ask delegations to keep their comments brief or their interventions brief, noting that this will be discussed in the contact group. So Kuwait, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, and I would like to thank the previous speakers, India, Lebanon. They already stated a lot of what I was generally want to talk about. So the need for the border framework to ensure sustainability beyond compliance, especially for the SMEs as a part of the KIP sustainable implemented was emphasized at that time. Sustainable cooling in the implementation of KIP was also highlighted. So it is important that these issues are adequately addressed in the replenishment study. Also, I would like to emphasize, as the distinguished delegate of India, Lebanon, on the decision 22.8 and what it's taken on. I think that the association cash flow needed for the fund windows, accordingly, TIEP should make a realistic assessment of cost for the implementation of sustainable HFCs phased down in Article 5 countries, considering all the elements listed in 28.2. So, finally, I just want to raise one issue that is very important for this delegation, that we want to make sure that the RTF constitution independence and avoid any conflict of interest when it's been coming. If not, this can lead to a bias of the assessment process for RTC. I think that it's the role of the Ozone Secretariat with RTF to ensure that this issue is taken care of when they institutionalize the RTF assessment task force, because we are very sensitive about the composition of RTF when this task force is finished, the draft report of that statement. And I think we are in a good hand from the Ozone Secretariat to take care in this consideration of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Kuwait. We now have Bahrain on the list. Bahrain, you have the floor.
شكرا سيدتي الرئيسة وأود في البداية أن أشكر.
Thank you so much. I would like to start by conveying my gratitude to the Ozone Secretariat for the outstanding organization of our meeting. I'd also like to convey my gratitude to the government of Kenya for their hospitality. Now, at the outset, I would like to back the statements made by Saudi Arabia, by India, by Lebanon, as well as by Kuwait. Inter alia, concerning the challenges facing states when it comes to coming up with solutions to replace HFCs, including in air conditioning, in the field of air conditioning. States which are experiencing rising temperatures and which require air conditioning in an intensive way face an especial problem. And for this reason, alternatives are a major challenge. As Saudi Arabia said, the various monitoring systems are very important in this field. States covered by Article 5 were assessed by the Multilateral Fund, and my delegation believes that there is a need to maintain the current level of financing for the whole of the period of 2025 through to 2029. Article 5 states require assistance in achieving gradual phase out by 2040. And when we adopted the Kigali Amendment, we promised Article 5 states that we would provide them with the necessary support. And by way of conclusion, I would like to back what was just said by Kuwait. Namely, that we should not include any changes regarding financing policies covering the period 2027 through to 2029. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahrain. We have Malaysia and Bangladesh. The list is closed with Bangladesh. So Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Since this is the first time that I take the floor, on behalf of the Malaysian delegation, I wish to express our sincere appreciation to the government and people of Kenya for their warm hospitality and gracious hosting of this meeting. We also extend our congratulations to both co-chairs and our deep appreciation to the Ozone Secretariat for the excellent arrangements made for the 37th meeting of the parties. Malaysia reiterates that the 2027 to 2029 replenishment must be adequate, equitable, and aligned with the real implementation needs, drawing on lessons from the HCFC phase out and HFC phase down. It should provide sufficient support for HPMP Stage 3, Kigali implementation plans, energy efficiency, capacity building, institutional strengthening, and regional cooperation. Referring to the fully bracketed draft decision discussed at the OEWG 47, Malaysia emphasizes that the contact group discussions should retain these key elements to allow TIP to conduct a comprehensive and balanced study. This is to ensure the sustainability of the compliance under the Montreal Protocol. With that, thank you.
Thank you, Malaysia. Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, distinguished colleagues. I would like to appreciate Kenyan government and Ozone Secretariat for their distinguished and remarkable hospitality. Actually, Bangladesh thanks the Secretariat for the draft decision on the terms of reference for the 2027-2029 replacement study of the Multilateral Fund as an Article 5 party and a least developed country. We stress 4 key points. First, the study should fully reflect implementation realities, including servicing sector, digitalization, refrigerant bank recovery and destruction, technician training, and energy efficiency improvements, including energy security issues, especially in high ambient temperature contexts like Bangladesh. Second, its methodology must be transparent and accountable and reasonably balanced, incorporating realistic cost factors for Article 5 countries and ensuring that all parties can provide national input along with their cordial support. Third, Bangladesh called for equitable, forward-looking funding horizon and asks that study result feed directly into timely, needs-based replacement decisions. Bangladesh remains committed to the effective implementation of the Montreal Protocol and its Kigali Amendment, and to a replacement process that delivers for all Article 5 parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of Bangladesh. On a number of occasions, the co-chair had indicated that the floor would be closed after the intervention from the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh, but thereafter we're reporting or recording 2 interventions from Indonesia and Kenya. In general, most parties have indicated that there is a need to consider the replenishment carefully and have identified specific areas which need to be discussed. Can I beg the indulgence of Indonesia and Kenya to please reserve your comments for the contact group so that we can move forward with the agenda items? Is there agreement from those delegations? Okay, thank you very much. So there is a contact group where you can identify all of the issues that you need to be included in the replenishment. Thank you for that. And now hand the floor over to my co-chair, Annie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantal. We now turn to agenda item 6 on enhancing regional atmospheric monitoring of substances controlled by the Montreal Protocol. In decision 36.1, the Secretariat was requested to report to MOP37, our meeting here today, on progress and any outcomes on the evaluation of suitability of potential sites for monitoring regional emissions of controlled substances for review by the parties, and to provide any updates on its cost estimates and options for long-term funding associated with atmospheric monitoring. You will recall that at OEWG 47, the Secretariat and the co-chair of the Advisory Committee of the Vienna Convention General Trust Fund reported on progress relating to the evaluation of potential monitoring sites. Plenary discussions were followed by discussions in an informal group through which the parties requested the preparation of a strategy detailing the activities under the various funding streams and showing how these activities complement each other for regional atmospheric monitoring. The suggested reports, including the strategy, are summarised in the addendum to the note for this meeting, while supplementary information on cost estimates is set out in document information Inf 6. And the exact references should be seen on screen anytime now. Or maybe not. That's okay. We'll move on. So now I would like to request the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee, presented by one of its co-chairs, Professor Ravi Shankara, to report on progress and implementation of Decision 36.1. Professor Ravi and Sophia, you have the floor. You have about 30 minutes. I'm going to put a stopwatch on you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you about this topic of enhancing regional atmospheric monitoring of substances controlled by the Montreal Protocol, according to the decision 36-1. This is a report by the Ozone Secretariat, that is Sophia here, and on behalf of the Advisory Committee, I'm going to be talking first. Just so that you know, I'm one of the co-chairs of the Advisory Committee. The other co-chair is Sophie Godin-Bigman. And some of the members of the Advisory Committee are here, so they could also answer some of your questions. Okay. Oh. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's get started. So what we're going to tell you today is the progress report on the response to the decision 36-1. The Secretariat and the Advisory Committee provided progress report to the 47th meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group in Bangkok. The current one, the progress report, focuses on the following issues: evaluating the suitability of potential sites for monitoring regional emissions of controlled substances. I will do that part. And the other two topics are the update to cost estimates and options for long-term financing associated with enhancing this monitoring, and also the work plan under funding streams in support of atmospheric monitoring that will be done by Sophia. Okay, this key thing I want you to see is this picture. If you look at it, what you see is there are some regions of the atmosphere that are well covered, and there's a very large part of the globe that is not covered. Okay, the well-covered regions are North America and Europe. Now, there are multiple stations coming up around China that are not necessarily shown here yet. Now, the reason you want this is I would suggest that we are in what we call the accountability phase of the Montreal Protocol. That is the protocol doing what it said it is going to do according to the schedules that are set forth, and we would like to know about it. And one of the things we want to know is how these emissions are changing for the controlled substances from various regions of the globe. So if you fill the gaps, this will enable parties to be aware of regional and global emissions of further considerations. Now, the advisory committee task for the Montreal for this particular meeting are listed here. Identify and prepare the map of possible monitoring locations. You can read the rest. That is actually done. I'm going to tell you about it. Identify and prepare maps of potential sites for establishing monitoring stations. That's also done. Assist the Ozone Secretariat in updating the cost estimates options for long-term financing associated with enhancing atmospheric monitoring. That is also done. 3 check marks. The other 2 topics, develop a list of scientific institutions and projects, specifically national and international, that work on atmospheric monitoring and related issues, with whom the committee should ensure coordination, cooperation, synergies, and partnership. This is in progress, and also I would put it to you that you all, the delegates, could help in this process, because you are an intermediary or a bridge between this process and your countries as what's going on there. And then start planning for the longer term work on calibration, validation of data, etc. Calibration is an essential component of this. We have to know exactly how much we are measuring. Okay, so if you think about it, that's fundamental to this process, and that's one of the things that also is in the process of being done. Now, the summary of the committee's work progress to date, we have identified the locations for monitoring based on known controlled substance emissions. So where do we want to go and look? Where the emissions are. And that's not all that matters. The prevailing winds carry these chemicals to the site where you observe. So we need to do the preliminary prevailing wind analysis. And then we have to do something a little bit more involved. These are called observation system simulation experiments to really kind of know what is the footprint of the emissions that a particular station can actually see. And that's done by computer modeling. And then a study of the impact of the measurement frequencies in deriving emissions. How often do you need to measure it? Is it enough to measure it once a year, once a week, once a day, 10 times a day? What do we need? And the lessons learned from setting up monitoring stations in Bola Island, that was very key. Items 3, 4, and 5 are carried out under the EU-funded project. And here I want to just note that Cornelius was a wonderful member of the steering committee, and we miss him. Summary, the lessons learned from Bola Island are listed here. The first thing is you can't just make it 1 year and say we are done. You have to measure it at least for 2 years to know things are working and we have confidence in the emissions. And of course, seasons change and the winds change, so we have to look at the seasonality of this issue. And there are always measurement difficulties. And it takes time to overcome them, especially because there's distance involved in some of these activities. And the examination of the correlation of different chemicals with co-located sources help us provide confidence. This is a little, I don't know, inside baseball, very techie thing point, but I'll be happy to tell you more if you are interested. And then also we have to worry about local emissions interfering with our measurements. So for example, in Bola Island, we found out that methyl iodide was being detected. It came from the Bay of Bengal. And also local hydrocarbon emissions were interfering in some of these measurements. So these are all kind of technical things we need to check out and make sure. And one thing that came home very clearly to us is we need a tower that is at least 30 meters high, where you can, from the top of it, you can sample the air. Now, there are other lessons learned from Bola Island and the advisory committee discussions. The first is it takes people, and it's imperative that we have qualified, willing partners in the sampling location. In the case of Bola Island, we're fortunate to have Professor Salam from the University of Dhaka in Bangladesh. Logistical issues, including customs and transportation, all of these things take time and have to be overcome. There are also problems. And it takes time to identify, diagnose, and fix instrumental problems. And last 2 points I cannot emphasize enough. It is imperative that this data be examined by everybody, all the scientists in the world. If you take the data and keep it to yourself, it is not going to be very useful. And also, I would suggest that more eyes look at the data, better interpretation you get, better confidence you will have. And the common propagation scales is essential, and I mentioned a second ago. And in this particular case, we use the A-gauge standards. The key issues for monitoring Montreal Protocol, oops, it didn't go in there. What happened? Okay. Some of these are mentioned. I'll briefly go through this. Calibration standards and calibration scales, they're not quite the same. You know, when you want to measure a meter, you don't take something to the Bureau of whatever in Paris and say, this is 1 meter. You just go get a measuring stick. And that's kind of the propagation scale, right? And then the capacity for chemical analysis at various analytical facilities around the world, we think there is sufficient capacity in existing analytical laboratories to carry out approximately 2,000 more flash samples per year. And this is using proven, well-established technique whose data you have seen from SAP for many years. And the identification of potential partners in countries and regions of interest is ongoing, and we have made some headways in the Indian subcontinent and also in Southern Africa. And you can't take time away from this, it's not moving. I can't move this, okay, sorry, you're gonna do this. Okay, thank you. Knowledge of available infrastructure is really important. You don't want to have to rebuild everything. So in this process, the Ozone Secretariat, in collaboration with WMO, Paulo Lage is here, has cataloged various potential locations available with infrastructure using the Global Atmospheric Watch Program. And also we have liaised with the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organizations and other monitoring stations which are being used for greenhouse gases. The optimal height, I already mentioned, 30 meters. It doesn't have to be a new tower, but maybe you can also use a telecommunication tower if you can get permission to do it, all to reduce costs and make progress quicker. And collaboration with other projects are also important. The thing that we should know is we are not the only ones doing it. Now we have other players in this arena, like NGOs who want to measure this. Okay, so we are always collaborating with them and also the countries which are doing them to make sure that we get most money for our buck. Can I go to the next slide, please? Okay. Sometimes the observation, these OSCEs, we need for planning and using. Based on the expert input, we have decided that one set of OSCEs is sufficient to get started. The number of inverse modeling that you all saw for various things, like 23 today, we think we should do at least 2, maybe 3, this inverse modeling to make sure that we account for various issues associated with these modeling activities, and that kind of gives us better reproducibility and accuracy. Wide availability of data to scientists is essential. I already emphasized this. We just can't say enough. And of course, taking data is one thing, but you have to store it somewhere so that it's all available. So data centers are essential, and we have liaised. We don't have to set up new data centers. We're liaising with existing ones so that they could also do this. For example, ICOS would be a potential site for saving the data. Next slide, please. How often do we need to measure? Good. We did a paper exercise. I didn't do it, but Alistair Manning and Luke Weston did it. If you look at the data from Gosan Station for HFC 134A, this is the data from 2008 to 2022. Each year, there are roughly 4,500 data points. Okay. Now, you can pretend that instead of taking the data every 2 hours, you took the data only once a day, or once every other day, or twice a week, or whatever frequency you want. And then you can ask yourself, what is the best frequency, optimal frequency? The thing we came up with is the daily and every other day sampling is close to high frequency measurements. And there's a lot of data in here on the right-hand side in that picture. It's very complicated to see. All I want you to see is that the smaller the frequency, there's longer the period between observations, larger the uncertainties, both in measurements and the trends. Next slide, please. I'll show that to you here very quickly. Don't look at the numbers. I hate tables. It's very hard to communicate. All I would like you to see is that as you go to lower and lower frequencies, the uncertainty in your estimates go down. Sometimes it even flips sign. So we think the optimal frequency is of the order of, to get started twice a week, and then daily sampling. And uncertainties in regional emission trends are always reduced if you increase the frequency. Higher the frequency measurement, the better the definition of not only the amount, but also where it is coming from. And there are also other things that one could do. For example, triangulation. If you have 2 different sites looking at the same emissions, you'll know exactly where it is coming from. Next slide, please. Paul Newman, many of you who know him, created this slide. And what this shows is essentially a map of the world. Superimposed on it is the emissions or the consumptions of various chemicals. In this particular case, it happens to be 134A. I strongly urge you to go look at the website that is shown there, and it's done for multiple chemicals. And what we identified is there are 10 regions on this planet that needs attention soon. And the circles around each of those points is 500 kilometers. The outer circle is 1,000 kilometers. The dot is where we can go and measure them. And based on these wind fields at 50 meters, we have kind of come to the conclusion these are good 10 sites to start with. Next slide, please. Something happened.
No, it's okay.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, I know that some of you are confused about the terminology, so I just want to make sure that we're clear what the terms are. Regional emissions is the region from which you're getting the emission. That's shown in the white box. The specific location you're measuring is that white dot. The site is actually the place where you're going to make the measurement. I took a picture from Bola Island and put it there. And the station is the infrastructure that's on the site to make the measurements. So we use these terms somewhat as though everybody knows it. I just wanted to make sure you all know this. Okay. And then there is the seasonality. You all know winds change with direction. So you can't just do it for one day, you have to do it for multiple seasons. And this shows, for example, how the wind patterns change in Vietnam. And for example, if you're trying to measure emissions from the eastern China, Vietnam would not be a good place, for example, in June and August. On the other hand, it could be for some other times. And also, if you're looking for emissions from Thailand, Vietnam would not be a good place any time of the year. So these are things that you want to know. Remember that these are seasonal footprints, but you really do data inversion using the real-time wind fields. So we know exactly where the wind is coming from. Next slide, please. So these are kind of technical things I showed you, but there are some other things that are just as important, or maybe even more important, that is for successful stations. These messages were listed in the white paper, workshop report, pilot project, and extensive discussions with the ADCOM. Okay, the scientific capability, interest, and willingness of the part is essential part of the effort. OSCEs for scientific sites before the stations are set up. Infrastructure, you need electricity, internet, roads, security, etc. You need logistical support. You need capable analytical facilities for chemical analysis to collect the samples and to analyze them. As I said, we have sufficient capabilities for the next few years. At some point, we might need to set up more, and additional capabilities are emerging in Europe and China. A common propagation scale, I'm sure you're sick of hearing this, is essential. In this particular case, we have decided it's sufficient to go with the propagation scale rather than a calibration scale, and sharing data with the extensive community and placing the data on accessible data centers. Now, on the left-hand side is the current situation. On the right-hand side is what we can achieve with these 10 stations. These are all located in these particular places. As you can see, we greatly increase the area of coverage. Not everything is covered, but you increase it by a great deal. Okay, and we already have carried out the OSCEs for the 10 stations. Of course, extending beyond the 10 stations would give better coverage on a global scale, and further funding beyond pending EU grant is needed to initiate even the proposed 10 stations, and collaboration with others is ongoing, and it will keep doing it, and funding needed to expand and continue beyond the EU funding period if you want to keep going. Incidentally, you don't want to do it for 2 years and said we are done. Okay, there are two complementary ways of doing it. Here is my cartoon for this. One, you hear a lot, flash sampling. You go, these are the flashes on the left-hand top corner. You take those flashes and you open it up at a specific time and you collect that sample. And then you take that sample on an airplane or somewhere to a central analytical facility and you chemically analyze them. The high-frequency stations are where you actually have the station and the instrument at the same place. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the flow chart for establishing monitoring stations. Okay. This is a little bit more elaborate, but more realistic and flexible approach that we have come up with. We have the initial site selection, then we suggest a 6-month data collection period for a survey period. And then if you think it's a good site, you can go and start collecting data for longer periods. If it's not a good site, go back and find another site. If the site is so good, you can put a high-frequency station there. And afterwards, you can change, depending on the suitability, increase the high frequency or increase flash sampling to get this data. Please note there's no specific timeline attached to this. This is just a conceptual framework. Next slide, please. Thank you. The previous one, sorry. So this is the bottom line from what I'm trying to tell you. The selected regions and locations we have come up with, this is the committee's wish list. Southern Asia, perhaps India and Bangladesh. Southeast Asia, perhaps Vietnam. Southern Africa, perhaps Botswana or South Africa. Middle East, perhaps Saudi Arabia. Southern America in the central part, Brazil or Argentina. And the other potential sites are also listed, and we haven't prioritized them. These are rank ordered based on all the considerations that I've given to you so far. With that, I'll turn you over to Sophia.
Thank you, Ravi. Yeah. As you know, decision 36-1 requested the Secretariat to provide, amongst other things, any updates on the cost estimates and options for long-term financing associated with enhancing atmospheric monitoring that had been provided last year in response to decision 35/14 and for consideration at this meeting. The cost estimates which were presented last year in response to the decision 35/14 were based on a spreadsheet model which was developed by a financial expert, and for ease of reference we can call it the 2024 model. So building on that model, 3 major updates were made in a new version, which we, for ease of reference again, we call it the 2025 model, which was also developed by a financial expert. So these 3 major updates was that a new monitoring approach is used in the 2025 model. Refinements have been made to cost categories where we include previously missing cost items, or we take explicit consideration of specific activities. And also the costs are now established for, the costs are calculated for establishing and operating all the required elements depending on both site location and available infrastructure. What is important to note here is that all these updates that we have incorporated in the 2025 model, they were based actually on inputs from experts participating in different monitoring networks, including experts in advisory committee members with expertise in atmospheric monitoring. I think I must. Okay, so a little bit more about what is the difference between the monitoring approach, the 3 updates between the 2024 and the 2025 model. In the 2024 model, the monitoring approach we used, it was a kind of fixed approach. That means that we applied low-frequency flask sampling or high-frequency in situ sampling, but throughout the monitoring period. But in the 2025 model, we used the phased approach, which presented by Ravi earlier, where we go through 4 important steps: site selection, initial flask sampling survey, then 2 years of flask sampling with slightly higher frequency, and then long-term monitoring with either a high-frequency station or a daily flask sampling approach. When it comes to cost categories, in the 2024 model, we had only 6 categories, including 11 cost items, and the costs were classified as either capital or operational. But now, in this model, we have 9 cost categories, 36 cost items, and the costs, and we allocate both capital and operating costs at each cost item, of course, as appropriate. Another update was regards the low and high cost estimates, and the range of estimates in the 2024 model were based on available or non-available infrastructure. But now the range is based on variability of in costs depending on where you are around the world and the type of infrastructure you have available. So here you can see very quickly, just schematically, the difference between the 2 approaches. In the 2024 model, as you can see, we applied only flask sampling or high frequency throughout the monitoring period, which was at the time 5 years, but now we have a more complicated and more realistic, I would say, approach as advised by the advisory committee. We thought that it would be perhaps useful to mention a couple of examples regarding to the cost refinements we've made. For example, in the case of the sampling tower, in the old model, the sampling tower included only capital costs, like the construction of it, but now we have more capital costs associated with that, like instead of not only the construction, but foundations, lighting, and so on, but also operational costs, like safety inspections, painting, etc. And when it comes to the analytical instrument, another example, which is an integral part of the high-frequency in situ station, in the past we had only, in the old model, we had only capital costs. That means actually the establishment of the analytical and the different supplementary instruments that were needed, but now we have the same capitals again, but also additional operational costs. So we ran then this new 2025 model with all these assumptions. The only thing that I want to highlight here is that as you can see, this is a phased approach, and these are the cost estimates for a 5-year program for one station. And then, as you can see here, for the preparatory phase and the year 1 and 2 phases, the costs are exactly the same because the same approach is used. But then, so at the year 3, 4, and 5, when you decide that you're going to go for high frequency or daily flask sampling station, the costs change. Perhaps you can see this development here where you see the same thing, the updated cost estimates for 5-year measurement program for one station, where you can see the high and low cost estimates for the preparatory phase are highlighted in shades of blue. For year 1 and 2, where we have the survey and the flask sampling at a slightly lower frequency with highlighted in shades of dark orange, then and then you decide year 3, 4, and 5 whether you want to go for a high frequency or a daily flask sampling for long-term monitoring. And you can see here that the costs are quite high in year 1 and year 3, and this is because of capital equipment costs that you will have to spend. Here we try to compare the results of the two approaches. What we presented, the cost estimates in year 2024, with the model of the 2024 model compared to the estimates of 2025, bearing in mind, of course, that the approach and the refinements are different. Then you can see if you go for establishing a high frequency in situ station, the new, more refined estimates are higher, actually, than what we had calculated with the previous model. And this is probably due to inclusion of additional capital costs, cost items for towers, itemized operational costs, and personnel costs. But in the case of a daily flask sampling station, if you are going to eventually go for such an establishment, then the total cost estimates with the 2025 model, they are lower than what we had estimated before. This is again for a five-year program, and these lower estimates are due to assumptions about infrastructure reuse and phased capacity building. We also try to, we also try to look into the programmatic approach. We had run with the 2024 model, we had run a programmatic approach where we looked at two scenarios. If we have a mix of stations for 5 years, how much would this cost? For a modest expansion with a new model, we found that the costs range between 5 and 12.5 million. For an aggressive expansion of 4 high-frequency and 6 daily flask sampling stations, the cost will be between 10 and 25 million. And these calculations include also not only capital and operational costs, which, as I presented earlier, but also contingency, program management, and program support costs. We tried also to see the effect of the availability of infrastructure on the different cost elements, on cost savings, and then we saw that for a high-frequency station, if you are going to establish a high-frequency in situ station and you have available key infrastructure like tower, building, and power supply, then the low costs, they are reduced even more by 22%. If you have infrastructure which is partly available, that means if you have to renovate some facilities, then you save about 6% of the total low costs. In the case you go for a daily flask sampling, and if you go for an automated option, then if you have key available infrastructure, then the savings are even higher, 58%, but if they are partly available, about 16%. Now, of course, if you integrate your program into other monitoring activities and make use of other facilities like for GO stations or CTBTO, then you can do this kind of piggybacking, as we call, and of course the costs will be reduced even further, but these options are still being explored. Very quickly, for this, so the current model is a spreadsheet model, and you can just change only 4 variables, which are listed here. The height of the tower, the method of flask sampling, if you want automated or manual, the number of years you want to do flask sampling for, and the choice of the long-term monitoring, high frequency versus flask sampling. But now the Secretariat is developing this model into a more user-friendly online tool, which the interested parties could use interactively in order to estimate costs for establishing and operating stations in their countries, taking into account their specific circumstances. And the last bit, there is only 2 slides left, sorry for that. We, at the last open-ended working group meeting, the parties asked us to provide a kind of strategy where we could describe the available, existing, and potential funding streams, with a view to also indicating the complementarity of this so that we can avoid duplication of work. So the Secretariat provided this information. The 3 funding streams are listed here. One is an existing one, which is the cash balance of the 2025 budget for the Trust Fund for the Montreal Protocol. This is $400,000 US dollars. And then we have a pending EU grant directly to the GTF, which was generously announced by the European Union at the last meeting. This fund amounts to 4.5 million euros, or about $5.2 million. And of course, we have a pending funding window under the multilateral fund. We provided, sorry for this. We provided information in the addendum to the note by the Secretariat about how we envisage these 3 funding streams to work together in the future. Here we have color-coded the 3 funding streams. You see the green one is the Montreal Protocol Trust Fund cash balance. The blue, the EU, the European Union grant, and the orange, the multilateral fund. So in decision 36/1, the Secretariat was requested to use some of these funds, of the cash balance, for activities related to finding the suitability of different sites. On an exceptional basis. We used only 60,000 out of this 400,000 for expert support in this endeavor, and we hope that perhaps there will be a possible carryover in next year, but of course this is up to the parties to decide. When it comes to the blue boxes here, which show the European Union grant flow, then according to the advisory committee, these funds, which are about as I said, $5.2 million, they could cover the costs for the selection of 3 sites, then flask sampling surveys, and a 2-year flask sampling, or a possible establishment of 1 high-frequency station during the survey period, if during the survey period we find out that we have an exceptionally good site, and then perhaps at the end of the 2-year flask sampling we can have the operation of 2 or 3 daily flask sampling stations. These were based on the advice by the advisory committee and using the phased approach. And of course we have the funding window under the MLF, the orange areas here. We know that in decision, according to the decision 96/56, which was taken by the Executive Committee earlier this year, the committee is going to be, will consider establishing a funding window for 3 pilot projects to enhance regional atmospheric monitoring. And provided that this funding window is established, then the MLF would be able to support the preparation of requests for 3 proposals, which could be put forward by the MLF's implementing and bilateral agencies on behalf of Article 5 parties, based on the suggestions by the advisory committee. Then they could do a two-year flask sampling, sampling surveys for these 3 sites, and followed by, and then this probably will happen in the years 2027, 28, 29. Then in around 2030, it will be possible to have submission of proposals by the bilateral and implementing agencies of the MLF on behalf of 3 Article 5 parties to establish then atmospheric monitoring stations. And then if provided that these proposals are approved by the executive committee, then the establishment of these stations can take place around towards the end of 2030, 2031. So this is more or less the plan, and this kind of funding will also be able to support not only the capital costs of this, but also the operational costs of these stations and their continued operation. Another important thing is, assuming that that I would like to highlight is assuming that the EU grant concludes by sometime in 4 years' time, let's say, around 2030, then MLF resources could be used to also support the continued operation of the 3 sites which will be set up with the EU funds. I think that's all. I'm sorry that it has taken so long, but this is all I had to say on the cost part of this presentation, and this concludes Ravi's and mine presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ravi and Sophia. A little longer than the 30 minutes anticipated, but there was a lot of very useful information conveyed there, and a lot of new information, I think, that the parties have not seen either at the previous meeting or in the documents that have been prepared for this meeting. So I think this presentation is very useful, and I would encourage the parties to have a look at this presentation in their own time to further digest its contents. I would like now to open the floor for a question and answer session for parties to get into some of the details from either Ravi or Sophia, and then we will open the floor for discussion. So please hold any statements or discussion items for later. This is just the question and answer session now. I see a number of parties are rushing to make their to press the buttons. So I will start with the first 3. We have Pakistan, followed by Saudi Arabia, followed by Lesotho. So, Pakistan, you have the floor. Please present your questions.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As Pakistan is taking the floor for the first time, so I wish to extend our sincere appreciation to the Government of Kenya for hosting the 37th meeting of parties, and to the Ozone Secretariat for their excellent arrangements and continued support to A5 parties. Madam Co-Chair, Pakistan acknowledges the remarkable success of the Montreal Protocol as Pakistan now moves into the implementation phase of Kigali Amendment. We believe strengthening atmospheric monitoring and emission verification of controlled substances is vital to sustain this success. In this regard, we understand that Secretariat is working on development of a list of scientific institutions that work on atmospheric monitoring. We are of the view that this list or inventory of scientific institutions, regional networks, and ongoing projects should be comprehensive, that focus on atmospheric monitoring, emission tracking, and analytical research relevant to Montreal Protocol controlled substances.
Excuse me, Pakistan, do you have a question? Because we're not in our statement phase. Can you please focus on your question, and we will move to your statements later. Thank you.
It was more like a statement and appreciation, but also a suggestion as well, because regarding this, this topic. So if you allow me, I can complete my suggestion part as well.
Thank you. Please be brief. We'd like to
Okay.
move to questions. Thank you.
By doing so, this inventory could serve as a living open access source to facilitate collaboration between A5, because my suggestion is about this, this comprehensive list, to facilitate collaboration between A5 and non-A5 research institution, encourage joint monitoring projects and data sharing, and identify innovation opportunities in low-cost sensing, satellite data integration, and model-based emission verification. So we consider that such platforms would enable Pakistan as well as the neighboring parties to connect with scientific partners and build indigenous technical capacity for sustained atmospheric observation and policy relevant research. Thank you.
Thank you, Pakistan, for that suggestion. Can I please insist on parties having a question and answer section at this point? I see that Saudi Arabia has disappeared from my list, so I will give the floor next to Liz Tholto. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam, and thank you for the chance you have given Lesotho. And as if from Lesotho, I just have two questions. One of the questions, if you check the maps and then you compare where the previous stations were placed, you find that some of the stations are placed on the hurricane or typhoon proofing sites. So in terms of the effects, what the effects are those phenomena have on the stations? The other issue is that in some cases there are a number of climatic effects which might affect, especially in terms of the power cuts and lightning issues. But I see you just have one station proposed for the place. And then how are we going to maybe cover the issue of discrepancy in terms of implementation if we placed just one station? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question, Liz Tholto. I'll take a couple more questions. Next on my list, I have Iran, Japan, European Union, Canada, Senegal, followed by Kenya. I think there are more after that, but we'll first turn to Iran and Japan for their questions. Iran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and also thanks the presenters. My question is about the selection of this region and location for the monitoring. I would like to ask the presenters whether that regarding the selection of the locations and regions, because they made some criteria like available of infrastructures and also expertise, whether they communicated with the members to see what kind of infrastructure or the expertise they have, or just they didn't communicate. I don't know how they selected this area and regarding this criteria that made it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iran. I turn now to Japan.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As this delegation is taking the floor for the first time, we'd like to begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to the ASEAN Secretariat, as well as both of our co-chairs for its tireless efforts in organizing this meeting, and of course to the government of Kenya for their warm hospitality in hosting us here in Nairobi. And Japan would like to also express our appreciation to the continued work of the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee, as well as to the European Union for its valuable contribution under the EU-funded project to enhance regional atmospheric monitoring. We'll welcome and appreciate the updates provided in the presentation just now, and we share the view that the strengthening monitoring is essential, particularly in light of the challenges such as the HFC 23 emission gap. In supporting this initiative, we would like to seek some qualification on a few points with the cost efficiency, effectiveness, and fund sustainability in mind. And first, regarding the potential collaboration with the relevant institutions, Japan, we place particular importance on leveraging existing infrastructure and fostering collaboration wherever possible. In this regard, we would appreciate if the Secretariat could share its assessment of feasibility, especially in relation to CTBTO's international monitoring system, which was mentioned as a potential infrastructure to be leveraged for cost saving and accelerated deployment in future. If any preliminary communication has been taken place, we would be interested to hear about the prospects for possible collaboration. We would also be keen to understand whether similar opportunities are being explored with other organizations, if any. And second, regarding the 2025 costing models, a new costing model, particularly on the proposed development of a web-based interactive tool, we understand that the intention to improve accessibility and the transparency of the data and cost information related to the activity, but we would appreciate a more detailed explanation of the expected costs and intended users and how this tool aligns with the cost effectiveness goals so that we can properly assess its actual need. And finally, regarding the fund amount allocated from the $400,000 located from the Montreal Protocol Trust Fund, we understand that the further activities are planned, and we do support the continued work in this area. But we do believe that any carryover into 2026 budget should be carefully justified, especially in light of the challenging budgetary constraints. And in this regard, we would appreciate further information on the details of the planned activities and expected costs in order to have a clearer grasp of the actual amount needed for the year 2026 based on the actual expenditure in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan, for those detailed questions. You did ask for considerably more detailed financial information. I'm not sure that this is exactly the right forum in order to get that information. I suspect that that might be more of an informal sort of offline type of discussion to have, because I don't think we have infinite time here to go into the perhaps the amount of detail that you're looking for. I'll turn now to the EU, and then I will pause and get Sophia and Ravi to answer the question. So, EU, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. First, I wanted to thank the Advisory Committee and the Secretariat for this most interesting presentation and the hard work. Our pilot project is coming to an end, but it's very nice to see that basically the expertise has been established now in the Advisory Committee, and the ongoing work is really impressive. But coming to my question, and it's only one question, and it's a specific one. In your examples of what potential combinations of costs could be and how they relate to high-frequency stations that are or in situ or flask sampling, you made an example, but when you have to choose in the end, where to go for in situ and where to go to flask sampling, what would be the kind of criteria to make these choices? Is it the location? Is it what you try to look for? Or is it rather that the site itself lends itself to one or the other? So the question is, what would make that choice between in situ and high frequency? Thank you.
Thank you very much, EU. So now I turn to Sophia and Ravi to respond to the many questions. I think perhaps the first question was from Ms. Thoto.
Thank you. Thank you, Lesotho, for your question. Maybe I should just preface by saying the list I showed you is our wish list. Nothing is settled yet. Okay? In other words, it's not like we have picked a specific place and said this is going to be it. This is what we would like to see happen. In terms of climatic effect, I was not completely sure what you mean. If you're asking me if the changing climate would have an effect on this, and the answer is yes, because the wind fields are going to change, but we don't expect it to change very drastically in the next decade. Maybe you should clarify what you mean by climatic effect. Oh, hurricanes. Oh, thank you. Yes, your point is very well taken. Thank you. Yes, if there are things like hurricanes, it can wipe out a station. We just have an example from another station where it happened. So we have to be very careful. That's why, incidentally, when you put up a tower, it costs a lot to make sure you don't wipe it out. Yeah, maybe I read too much into your question. So you mean real near-term impacts of changes. Okay, thank you. I hope I answered your question. Should I take it on? Yeah. Thank you for your question, Iran. The selection of regions was based on where the current emissions are. Okay? So, and also there we have to prioritize which has the most emissions. If we had an opportunity, we would like to kind of say, I said, we would need a lot more sites across the globe. And to do the selection, that's when we have to kind of actually talk to individual institutions and scientists. That's a very important step. I hope that answers your question. We have two different answers to parts of the Japan question. We know that there's an enormous amount of capability in Japan. We would welcome the opportunity for collaborations and using those facilities and the capabilities. And so hopefully we can do that. Specifically about CTBTO sites, we're exploring it, but there's one key difference between what we need for atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances versus what CTBTO does. CTBTO actually measures things at the surface for the most part. And secondly, they're located very close to urban areas. So they might not always be feasible, but people from CTBTO are extremely helpful in collaborating with us. Thank you. You want to say about the model?
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. Regarding the question by the distinguished delegate of Japan about the costs for the online tool that we want to establish, there will not be any because we had some leftover money from the EU pilot project, and we have been communicated with the European Union, and they generously allowed us to use a little bit of funds for the development of this online tool. So there will not be any financial implications there. I think that's all I have to say because as the co-chair rightly mentioned, the details of how we use the 400,000 perhaps is not in the remit of this meeting at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Japan was actually asking about more detailed information about the actual costings that have been, the 2025 costings that have been provided. So I think that's something perhaps to take offline. But there was still a question from the EU about the criteria for flask versus in situ monitoring. Ravi, I guess you would take that one probably.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your question, European Union. I wish Cornelius was sitting right next to you so I could have answered it for you. The frequency of measurement, you can make very high frequency measurements with flasks. Or you could have an instrument right there measuring every two hours. As to when you switch from a flash sample to a high frequency station is not really that clear cut. All we know is that higher the frequency of measurement, better off we are, and both for kind of locating the source and calculating this emission strength. So the idea is, but then the thing that happens with high frequency station is the analytical instrument is at the location, which means you have to have the expertise right there. Okay? While for the flash samples, at least in the beginning, we can actually have the analytical facilities in established laboratories. So that's the main issue, but I'll be happy to talk to you in more detail about a give and take of high frequency versus flash sampling, if I may. Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi. On my list now, I have Canada, Senegal, Kenya, China, South Africa, followed by Saudi Arabia. Canada, you have the floor to ask your questions.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and thank you to Dr. Ravi Shankara and Sophia from the Ozone Secretariat for your reports and presentation. I mean, we found them very useful, as was the case at the OEWG. And I'm glad that Ravi is able to join us in person this time. I apologize, I have a few questions, but I think it's important for parties to really ask questions and be clear as we move forward with this work. I think you responded to the question of Iran with respect to the selection of regions, and I understand that. I guess my question is also a sub-question is, in that consideration, did you consider, the areas where we've identified that we have particular gaps between top-down and bottom-up emissions, recalling that this was part of what was driving this concern, so we had identified gaps in CFC 11, CTC, HFC 23, production feedstock emissions. Was that part of the consideration that you took into account when you selected the regions? Then with the specific locations, how far have you gone beyond the Aussies in looking at these locations? For instance, have you looked at accessibility and infrastructure connections yet, or this is something that still needs to be done? Thirdly, and this is also similar to the question that the EU asked about, whether to go for high frequency in situ or daily flash sampling. I understand it's not clear cut, but is this something that could be decided in advance of the steps of going through the flash sampling? Like if we say, well, we have so much budget, and so let's just go for high frequency in situ, or do we have to wait until step 2 and step 3 of the flash sampling and then try to determine, what works? This would be helpful in order to plan, a little bit, the resources, if it's something that, can be decided in advance, or we have to wait to get more information from the observations of the sites themselves. Then just a few questions to the Secretariat. And I notice, and I appreciate the more detailed costs and all the categories of costs that you have in the information document. Personnel costs, we didn't understand, because apart from one case where you put 140,000, most of the personnel costs are low, like going from $4,000 a year to $15,000 a year. So is it assumed that you don't need to have one person sort of working full-time at these stations, and it's just someone coming in, part of the year doing, okay. So maybe you're already answering it, but maybe you could provide a little bit more detail on how these were arrived at. Then for the EU funding, you indicated that based on that funding, you could fund potentially 3 sites. The only way we could get to that number was if we picked the high cost of the one high frequency station and the high cost of 2 daily sampling stations, then those would add up to about $5 million, a little bit more. So just wanted to check that this is this is what you arrived at. And of course, keeping in mind, so if these are the high cost, potentially there could be more that could be funded through that $5 million. I think I'll stop here. I mean, like Japan, we had a little bit of questions on, how the funding, also was not only the funding for 2025, but the expert support that was funded through the cash balance of the trust fund. It would be good to have maybe a little bit more information, more specific information about that, but I think that could wait until further discussion or another report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada. There was quite the list of questions there. I turn now to Senegal. You have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. In turn, I would like to also thank the Secretariat, but also the Advisory Committee for the important work which is being done in order to provide us with the scientific and technical information which can help us to lead our work and guide us to decisions. I'd like to ask a question which relates to an observation which was made in the presentation, consisting of promoting cooperation with scientific projects and programs which exist in this subject. So I'd like to recall that starting from the adoption of the Kigali Amendment, activities on ozone are closely linked to activities relating to climate change. So I would like to know whether today the scientific and technical follow-up organisations working on ozone are working in close cooperation with the Intergovernmental Group of Experts on the Development of the Climate as part of atmospheric evaluations which are regularly carried out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senegal. I will turn to Kenya for its questions, and then I will turn to the podium for another set of answers. Kenya, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Since this is the first time for this delegation from Kenya to take the floor, I wish actually to thank the Ozone Secretariat for the excellent organization of this meeting. I also want to thank the presenters, that is from the Ozone Secretariat and the Advisory Committee, for the progress report in responding to that decision 36-1 on that. So, Madam Co-Chair, actually I have two short questions which I would like to raise after actually welcoming the delegates to Nairobi. So the delegates are warmly welcome to Nairobi. So my question is, I know when they were considering this location or the sites for the monitoring station, I would like to know whether there was a threshold of emissions. I know they have responded to Iran and maybe Canada in that line also. I would like to know whether there was that threshold of emission. And then the second one is, we know that there are actually what they call global atmospheric watch stations in some areas like Kenya. And we would like to know whether those existing global atmospheric watch were actually taken into consideration when they were identifying the monitoring stations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kenya, for those questions. I now turn to Ravi and Sophia. Perhaps, Ravi, you could lead off with some of the questions from Canada.
Co-Chair, and thank you, Canada, for your questions. There are multiple considerations in making these choices. Like we said, you can, a priori, if we had the money, and I would like to put a high-frequency station everywhere, okay? But unfortunately, that is not feasible. So you have to kind of make some choices. Now, in terms of, so that's kind of it's not a simple scientific consideration, is my point. It's a practical consideration. The second thing was accessibility and infrastructure is a very important point you raise. More infrastructure there is, lower the cost to start this program. And I cannot emphasize that more. If you already have a tower, it's really helpful. And on the other hand, if you don't even have electricity and a place to put an instrument, it will take a lot of effort. So the third question is kind of related to your first question. Why did we take this stepwise approach? We actually thought that it is really beneficial to sample a site for at least 6 months of data to make sure it is going to give us the information we want. Okay, so now the other part of that you mentioned also correctly, I'm making more questions out of your questions, is that yes, we did consider things such as HFC 23 or whatever those issues are, and where would better information be obtained for such questions also. And we also have to look ahead. It is not just trying to solve the problem of today, but also trying to anticipate what might be coming up in the future for the Montreal Protocol. I hope that answers the question. Thank you for your question, Senegal. Maybe I should just preface something. I did not say it clearly. There are two other points I wish I had mentioned. One of the key components of this project is knowledge transfer. When I say knowledge transfer as opposed to capacity building, it's actually a two-way street. You transfer knowledge from the people who have the technical information, from the ones who are already doing it to the ones who want to do it, and in the inverse, the local knowledge is absolutely crucial for making these stations work. And the second thing is the concentrations we're interested in for the Montreal controlled substances are roughly 1 million times less than greenhouse gases. So when you optimize the system for greenhouse gases, it may not always be the best place to do controlled substances. So for example, we want the gases to be mixed from the region of emission and be sampled in a region where it has no local sources. So you can't be close to urban sources. So it's a kind of balancing act. I hope that answers your question. Do you want to add to that? Okay.
Sorry, Ravi, before you lead off, there was a question from Canada about you're thinking about how far beyond Aussies you've gone in terms of a selection of sites,
yes,
and also some questions from Kenya.
Yes, the Aussies question is a really good one. Actually, it was on the slide, but I didn't emphasize it. And that is, we have done the Aussies for the rough locations. Once you decide you want to put a station, you want to do the Aussies again, perhaps, especially if the orography is different. If you have a station at 1,000 feet, or as opposed to 5,000 feet, it makes a big difference. So we have to rerun the Aussies. And also, if you happen to be in a valley, it's a problem, or a benefit, depending on how you look at it. Thank you for your question, Kenya, and I was just going to answer part of your question. The gas station question was similar to what Senegal asked about climate gases. Gas station rightfully has emphasized so far the climate gases, and and there are facilities that we could use. So we actually, just so that you know, the person from WMO, Pablo Lage, he's a member, an observer on our advisory committee, and he's here at the meeting, and you could ask him about that more. And I'll turn it over to you. Oh, threshold for emissions, yes. Oh. The threshold for emissions is a hard question. In a sense, especially if you're doing sampling once a day or once a week, you might not catch the wind exactly where you want it. And also, when you are talking about threshold, what we are measuring is concentration. And then you're converting the concentrations to emissions. So the threshold for most of these concentration measurements are in subparts per trillion. That is like 1 part in 10 to the 13 is roughly some of the thresholds. But lower the concentration, larger the uncertainty, as you'll see in some of the other presentations. Thank you. You want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Ravi. I can respond to a couple of questions from Canada. Regarding the personnel costs, yes, the range is quite big because if you have, for example, flask sampling, then you don't need to pay personnel so much. You may have somebody who is going to collect now and then the flasks, and you pay for this kind of service. But if you have a high-frequency station, then you need somebody who is more permanently, let's say, based at the station, and he has a very good knowledge and is educated enough to carry out the monitoring and the analysis. When it comes to the 3 sites that we put, indeed, if you, on the flow chart that we have about the different funding streams, we looked, of course, at how much money available we have from the EU grant. And if you were to go for a high-frequency station, then you will have money only for, let's say, another 2 flask sampling stations. You can very comfortably use 3 flask sampling stations in the long term if you don't go for a high frequency, but I think that the money is not enough to have 3 high frequency stations, for example, in the long term. So that's why we provided more in the documentation, the possibility of having, let's say, a high frequency station during the survey if a site proves to be very good, and then create and then fund another 2 flask sampling sites to fit the budget that we have available. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi and Sophia. On my list now, I have China, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, United States, and Bhutan. If any other delegation has questions, please make it known now so we can finalize the list. China, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. This delegation agrees that the atmospheric monitoring have provided a crucial scientific foundation for the ongoing development of the protocol and of great significance to generate meaningful and comparable scientific results. Atmospheric monitoring must be a long-term effort that requires sustained investment in both human and financial resources. According to the Secretariat's report, according to our understanding, the current budget estimates are based on a 5-year cycle, including the station establishments and operational costs. We would like to further clarify whether after these 5 years, the operational cost will remain roughly at the same levels projected for the 4th and 5th years. And the source of funding, we would like to hear the advisory committee's views, should the future financing continue to come from the multilateral fund, or will it require domestic contributions from the host countries of the monitoring stations? Thank you.
Thank you very much, China, for those questions. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. This is the first time the delegation of South Africa has taken the floor. So we would like to thank the government and the people of Kenya for their warm welcome into their beautiful country and hosting the MOP. We would also like to thank and congratulate the Secretariat for the good organization of the meeting. And to the two co-chairs, we look forward to your leadership as always. We have just one question, Madam Co-Chair, and it relates to the costs. Do the cost estimates that have been made take into consideration existing infrastructure and resources that already exist in different regions, considering for the new and additional monitoring capacity? Thank you.
Thank you very much, South Africa, for your question. I now turn to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. First, I would like to thank the Ozone Secretariat and the Advisory Committee for this very informative presentation. I have 3 questions for the presenters. First, on slide 7, under Lesson Learned from Bola Island, you've mentioned that logistic issues can delay data collection. Could you please elaborate further on the nature of these logistic issues and how they were addressed? Second question, in the same slide, you've also mentioned that it takes time to identify, diagnose, and fix the instruments because of the distance between sampling sites. My question is, how could such a delay affect data quality in the short and long term? Last point, we would like to refer to the response provided regarding the criteria for selection potential locations for new regional atmospheric monitoring station. We note that the panel indicated that the selection was based, among other factors, on area of high emissions. However, Decision 36/1, which established this mandate, makes no reference to emissions level as a criteria for site selection. Rather, it emphasizes representation, global coverage, regional balance, and inclusion of under-monitored regions. Therefore, we seek clarifications from the presenters on what specific emissions this criteria refers to and how this aligns with the mandates provided by the parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saudi Arabia, for your questions. I'm just sort of trying to balance questions versus time here. We might take one more. No, actually, we won't. We'll turn to the Secretariat and to Ravi for the responses to the questions from China, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia. Left on my list, I have United States of America, Bhutan, and Antigua and Barbuda. The list is about to close. If there are any countries desperate to ask a question, please press your button right now because the list is closing. Thank you very much. The list is now closed, with Antigua and Barbuda being the last delegation. So now I turn to Sophia and Ravi for the answers to the questions that have just been posed. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Thank you for your question from China. I'm going to try to answer part of your question, and Sophia is going to answer part of it. You're absolutely correct. This problem is not going to end in 5 years. It has to go on longer. So that is a given. But we have to walk before we run. So we have to start somewhere. And this is what we are starting with. And your point you made is extremely beneficial for us. The domestic contributions are very important. Sometimes we minimize it. It is because the in-kind contribution from domestic contributions are extremely important, especially when it comes to people. It is not just a piece of instrument that has to be used, but it's actually people who have to be there, do the measurements, and interpret the data. So in terms of costs, one thing that could happen, perhaps, is as we put up more and more stations, the cost per station could come down. These are highly specialized instruments that we are deploying, and if there is a market for more of them, it is very possible that there'll be lower cost instruments that'll be coming online. So just, I'm sure you know this, China has put up a lot of stations, and they've also built an instrument that perhaps would be available to others to buy and use. So those kinds of things are extremely beneficial in the long run. I'll turn it over to Sophia for that.
Thank you, Ravi. I don't think I have anything to add on that, but I can take also the decision, the question from South Africa about whether the costs have taken into account the existing infrastructure. So basically, in building this model, we have consulted with the experts in atmospheric monitoring, who are also members of the advisory committee, and they provided costs for different cost elements in different parts of the world, because they are not going to be the same. The costs are not going to be the same. So if you have a tower, for example, in a continent, maybe it will be cheaper to establish it there, to set it up there, than if you have a tower in another continent. So these kind of ranges of costs are taken into account. Now we are working with WMO to try to find the actual existing infrastructure close to the sites that they have been identified by the advisory committee. So then we have a clear idea of how much infrastructure actually we have available, and then we can see what the impact of this particular infrastructure will be on the cost estimates. I hope this responds to the question by South Africa.
Okay. Turning to the question, thank you for the questions from Saudi Arabia. You had three questions. I'm going to kind of start with your middle question. How can data quality affect with the measurements? Greatly. And that's why you have to take enormous amount of care to make sure the quality of the data is excellent. The emission estimates you make critically depends on the quality of the data. That's a simple question, simple question to answer. Now, let me try your third question. Yes, it was for global monitoring. That's what the decision was. But again, you have to start somewhere, and we have to make a decision, where do you want to start first? So the idea was, if you kind of look for places where the emissions are up, high, and are likely to increase, wouldn't that be the information you want to know? So ideally, you would have measurements across the globe so that you can actually know the whole information. I mean, in terms of science, it would be wonderful if your regional estimates from all the parts of the globe add up to the global emission estimates you can make. Okay? So it is a question of money and where to start. In terms of logistics, I was not completely sure what logistical steps you're talking about. I'll tell you about the Bola Island experience. Maybe I will answer it. So, for example, one of the flash samples that was collected in Bola Island, when came back and analyzed, it was clear it had a leak. Okay, so they were measuring something other than what they're supposed to be measuring. But it took time to figure out there was a leak, and then to have that fixed and go back. And we had to change some pumps and do all sorts of stuff. So the logistics are very critical. If you're right there, it will be very easy. You'll solve the problem maybe in a day or two. But when you have a collection sample where you collect maybe a dozen samples before you ship it to analytical facility, where it takes them a week to analyze, that's when these things take time, and those are the logistical issues one has to think about. I hope I answered the question. If I didn't, I'll be more than happy to sit with you to try to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravi and Sophia. So we now come to the last three countries on my list with questions. So I turn now to the United States. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. So thank you to the Advisory Committee and the Ozone Secretariat for their informative presentation. There was a lot of new information to take in and think about, and we appreciate all the hard work that these groups have put in to bring this information to us today. We continue to be very supportive of enhancing global atmospheric monitoring in order to keep us informed about the atmospheric abundances of controlled substances so that we can better understand whether the Montreal Protocol is really working. So we were really interested to see the 10 sites that the Advisory Committee suggested for filling in this global picture. So the questions that we have are, for the 10 sites that were identified by the Advisory Committee, have you identified a suitable partner at any of these locations yet? And how many of those sites already have available infrastructure? And what would be the total cost estimate for those top 5 locations that were identified based on the available infrastructure? Some other parties have mentioned the importance of long-term sustainability of these sites beyond just this initial pilot stage of support. So one question is that for current stations in the A-gauge and GAW networks, how are those funded? So our understanding is, many of these are academic-based stations and maybe supported by scientific grants within countries. So if you could just give us a better understanding of how existing stations are already supported, that would be helpful. And then one clarification question for the Secretariat about the EU grant funding. It sounds like what was outlined in the paper was that 3 stations would be established based on what you thought the funding would afford. But we wanted to just clarify and understand if there are any constraints on the number of stations that could be established with this funding. Thanks.
Thank you very much, United States. I turn the floor to Bhutan.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Since this is the first time this delegation has taken the floor, we would like to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat, as always, for all the preparatory work and timely sharing of documents. We would also like to thank the government and people of Kenya for hosting us in their beautiful country. I would like to also thank the Advisory Committee for the comprehensive report and presentation today. Most of the questions have already been asked by previous speakers and already answered, so our remaining questions are, as mentioned by the committee on the need of a local expert who can measure and analyze data, what plans exist for training local experts under knowledge transfer and laboratories in Article 5 countries to handle calibration, data interpretation, and maintenance of sampling equipment? And our second question, and the last question, is since the advisory committee has noted in their presentation that collaborating with others, those that are funded by NGOs, would further enhance coverage, has the committee already explored collaboration with existing regional environmental monitoring programs? Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Bhutan. Antigua and Barbuda, you didn't ask the floor. In which case, there is room for Bangladesh, who I know press their button after I close the list, but since we are down one speaker, we have made room for one speaker. So Bangladesh, you have the last question. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Thanks to Advisory Committee for the very exclusive report. I have a very quick question about the fate of existing station. Is there any plan to continue the existing station for sustainable purpose? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So I now turn to Sophia and Ravi to answer the many questions, perhaps starting first with the US questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Thank you, US, for the questions. We're going to answer it in a couple of parts. We have selected the 10 sites. We do not have we have not yet identified suitable partners for all the 10 sites. We are starting to explore. We have some potential partners we have to talk to and develop further. Infrastructure, yes, we are doing that constantly, trying to figure out what is available and what's not. Hopefully, when WMO and the Ozone Secretariat who are working on it will come up with a little bit more detailed list of what infrastructure is available. Now, your cost for the top 5 stations, if I were to do a ballpark estimate, it'll be 5/3 multiplied by 5.2 million, okay, roughly. So it's essentially, that would be rough ballpark estimate. But the thing that we found was we constantly can save money by doing things in a little bit flexible way, which is what we have done. In fact, the amount of data we got from Bangladesh for the extremely generous funding from EU was enormous, because there's enormous amount of in-kind contribution in going in this. You're also correct that most, in fact all, of the current stations whose data you're relying on right now are funded by national agencies, which means either national labs or funding from national agencies to universities. So for example, NOAA funds its own stations, and A-Gauge, which is an international conglomerate, is funded by individual countries, and they are the coalition of the willing who want to do it a certain way. So what we are doing here is a little bit of a paradigm change of actually trying to fund it by a different set of mechanisms. And that has both advantages and certain disadvantages. The advantage of the country funding its own work is obvious. The only thing that we would like to make sure is that we can put all the data on a common footing using the same calibration scales, and then so that we can compare data. and all the data would be available for everybody to look at. Now, the thing that we are doing with this paradigm is we are going to ask people to actually make the data available if they get funding from this. So that's not quite the question you answered, but I just wanted to put that out there. Should I take the Bhutan question? There are no constraints in the number of stations from European Union funding. More, if we can stretch it out, we'll do it. But we have to be honest, because we just can't have the entire scientific community become completely exhausted in trying by doing pro bono work. They'll just do it for so long. So I don't know if it helps. Let me just take a quick shot at the question from Bhutan. Thank you for that. What plans exist for training? It's there. It's part of this thing. And we would like to train, ideally we would like to twin a particular station with a particular laboratory they're going to collaborate with. And then we can actually have those people trained in those laboratories, and the people from those analytical facilities visit and make sure that things are going the way it should. So this is a very useful thing that we can do, and that's planned in there. In terms of NGO collaborations, we are collaborating with them pretty closely. I don't know how to express this. Is one NGO that has funded $10 million to one of our colleagues in the US. Some of us are on the advisory committee for that project also. So we know exactly what they're doing, they know exactly what we're doing. So that is one thing about scientists. They want to get the most for their money, and they'll go to great lengths to make sure of it. So that's already built in and is ongoing. But if there are others that you all know of, it will be very beneficial for us to contact them to make sure there's no duplication and there is synergy between these programs. You want to answer the Bangladesh question? Thank you for your question from Bangladesh. It was an extremely beneficial collaboration. Depending on how things go, yes, we might go back to Bangladesh. It's a lot of things to be decided. We know that that station right now has a 10-meter tower. It would need a 30-meter tower. That's one thing we do know. And possibly it could be located at a slightly different location because it's too close to the estuaries and Bay of Bengal. So we would like to avoid that issue. So there is good possibility we could go back to Bangladesh. I hope I answered all the questions.
Thank you very much for the very many interesting questions, and thank you to Ravi and Sophia for being patient and running through each of the questions as they have arisen. So we release Sophia and Ravi from the podium, and we now turn to interventions and statements that parties may wish to make in relation to this issue. We note that Pakistan has already made a statement, and so we take that into account in our thinking now. So I have a few parties wishing to take the floor immediately. I have Brazil, Russian Federation, Ecuador, Nigeria, and Saudi Arabia. So that will be our starting point. So Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. All protocols observed at the outset. Brazil thanks the Secretariat, the staff, including interpreters, the hosts, and organizers of the meeting, and also joins in extending condolences to Mr. Cornelius Ryan, friends and family. We also thank the document prepared for this agenda item and the presentations made and the very deep questions and answers session that we just had. Madam Co-Chair, the monitoring of substances is essential to the success of the ozone regime, and the adoption of measures to this end requires adequate technical and financial support from the Multilateral Fund. We note with a lot of interest that Brazil has been identified as one of the most suitable locations for improving regional atmospheric surveillance, based on an analysis of estimates of possible regional emissions and prevailing atmospheric winds in areas that are not currently monitored. The previous decision mentioned potential for partnering with scientific institutions that can provide personnel for or technical expertise in the collection, management, and data analysis, or any other kind of in-kind contributions, and it also mentioned potential cost savings and other benefits of relying on existing infrastructure and monitoring networks. I would like in this regard to reiterate Brazil's willingness in hosting one of the atmospheric monitoring bases in our territory. Teachers of our public universities and researchers of our public universities are in the list of institutions with relevant scientific publications on atmospheric monitoring already. There is some installed scientific capability, both in more central locations, if the intention is to capture the center point of the subcontinent, or if the intention is to be near industrial areas, winds considered, that is also a possibility. Some of our public universities have towers that perhaps could already fit the purpose with minor adjustments or adaptations, although we are not very knowledgeable on this. And we, however, have not any budgetary indications for the time being that beyond university staff and land itself belonging to a public university, we could offer any other counterpart funding in the short or medium term. The advisory committee mentioned, and we in principle favor the idea that data generated, regardless of where the regional stations are, should be at open access somehow. We are not sure if the status of the data generated is something that the advisory committee has already considered in more depth. We understand sustainability remains an issue. It has been discussed during the Q&A, and even if installation costs, which tend to be the higher part, are found and covered, the long-term running of this work may become an issue in the years ahead, so we also thank those that intervened in the debate beforehand regarding the sustainability point. Perhaps this is something that would still require further coordination, cooperation, and consideration from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brazil, for your observations and close attention to this issue. I turn now to the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Co-Chair. Now, at the outset, we would like to note the outstanding nature of the reports by both Ravi and Sophia, with very detailed information and conclusions based on the 2-year-long experiment carried out by the observatory on the Bola Island. Now, one of the conclusions clearly demonstrates the importance of contacts with scientists in the region. In our view, this is insufficient, however. What is even more important is the existence of agreements with national atmospheric monitoring services. And in those countries, those regions, which have been selected to have monitoring stations established, well, these countries do have atmospheric monitoring services. For this reason, there is a need to send official requests to these services, to these agencies. They will consider them. Now, the request will have to contain information about the type of work which will be carried out, especially the collection of samples, of atmospheric samples, with subsequent analysis in another country, is something which for a number of states could be considered to be relatively sensitive. For this reason, there is a need for all interested parties in the country, all interested services in the country, to agree to this. And of course, there's no we are not sure that such an agreement will, there's no certainty that such an agreement will in fact be struck. Now, in looking at the different options for the collection stations, the monitoring stations, this formal but essential factor needs to be taken into account. And we need to base ourselves on possibilities rather than on the desires of scientists in individual states regarding what information they are able to access, just to ensure that we don't end up with a situation where we all want, but we end up with nothing. We have to start by striking an agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Russian Federation, and I think this point has been well noted, and I think even perhaps taken into account in some previous decisions that have been taken by the parties. I now turn to Ecuador. You have the floor.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Since this is my first intervention at this section, in this session, we would like to express our gratitude to the Secretariat for their organisation of this session. Our country is listed for the Central America region. We would like to correct that to South America. With regards to mapping, we have complex issues which have not been taken fully into account. Their recent consultations with the focal point means that we can propose the Andes as a site. We'd like to correct the regional classification of Ecuador, and we need to have dedicated Andean sites so we can assist in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ecuador, for your observations. I turn now to Nigeria. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. My delegation wishes to thank the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee of the General Trust Fund for financing activities on research and systematic observation relevant to the Vienna Convention for their efforts in bringing up the report on progresses in the implementation of Decision 6/1. For us, we believe it is a step in the right direction towards ensuring the establishment of more monitoring stations to enhance atmospheric monitoring of substances control under the Montreal Protocol. However, we wish to reiterate our concerns on the challenges of emissions of substances not controlled under the protocol, such as very short-lived substances, and concerns on compliance with the rules on the illegal production and trade in controlled substances. Furthermore, emissions of controlled substances from the production and the use of substances as feedstocks from other exempted uses, such as for QPS, and also the possible emission from banks of controlled substances in old equipment nearing their end of life, especially in Article 5 countries, remain a challenge which my delegation believes need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigeria. I turn the floor now to Saudi Arabia.
شكرا سعادة الرئيس المشارك. تلاحظ المملكة العربية السعودية.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. We would like to appreciate the progress made when it comes to the implementation of the relevant decision and the setting up of these local monitoring stations, which should be based on clear scientific data. Basing ourselves or working to acquire the capacity to cover all of these regions and to fill in the gaps rather than on emissions or unverified calculations. So these stations should be set up as part of a transparent approach, one which respects national sovereignty over data collected, which would then enjoy mutual trust. We urge the creation of these stations in regions which have a lack of monitoring stations, such as Arab states and other states of high ambient temperature. Now, we recommend the setting up of a holistic strategy, a comprehensive strategy, which could set out continuity mechanisms and ensure the sustainability of these stations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saudi Arabia, for your observations. The next countries on my list are Bangladesh, South Africa, European Union, China, Australia, followed by Indonesia. Bangladesh, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair and distinguished delegates. Bangladesh thanks the Ozone Secretariat and the Advisory Committee for their report on progress in implementing Decision 36/1. We particularly welcome the successful outcomes and lessons learned from the Bola Island pilot monitoring project, which demonstrate both the feasibility and the high value of regionally coordinated atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances. We strongly support the Advisory Committee's approach of evaluating potential sites based on scientific and technical criteria and of sharing the lesson learned to ensure that future stations are sited and configured for maximum regional benefit. We also appreciate the Secretariat and Advisory Committee for providing costed options and recommended modalities for long-term and sustainable financing. We believe that a dedicated and predictable funding window under the multilateral fund can ensure long-term operation and maintenance. Madam Co-Chair, Bangladesh stands ready to continue hosting and contributing to regional monitoring initiatives and to work with partners to ensure that future investments are robust, sustainable, and regionally equitable. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much, Bangladesh. I turn the floor now to South Africa.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair. The earlier discussions on Agenda Item 5 on HFC 23 emissions highlighted discrepancies between what is monitored and what is reported. This strengthens and further indicates the importance of enhancing regional atmospheric monitoring of substances controlled by the Montreal Protocol. Atmospheric monitoring of emission sources is crucial in ensuring that emissions of controlled substances are correctly identified, located, and quantified. For such to happen, there is a need for provision of financial resources, technology transfer, and capacity building to set up effective monitoring stations at appropriate sites and to train personnel to operate those monitoring stations. In that regard, this delegation calls for the provision of adequate financial resources under the MLF to enable effective monitoring in all 5 United Nations regions at suitable locations, taking into consideration the differences in geographical topography, size in land area, and unique region-specific challenges. In concluding, Madam Co-Chair, earlier during the Q&A session, we asked about existing infrastructure and resources. The reason we asked is because as South Africa, we have an institution, the South African Weather Services, that assists us in monitoring many substances, including ozone-depleting substances. The institution has some capabilities, but will need further support to improve its efficiency. So we are offering our institution as a possible partner in this regard. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, South Africa, and it's quite gratifying to hear the interest in by so many countries to participate and contribute to this important issue. I turn the floor now to the European Union.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We note that the findings and the methodological results developed under the EU-funded pilot projects has laid a good basis for work. As I already indicated, the project is now almost finalized. And I need to restate that actually the project is, if I may say, a success exactly because we had so much in-kind contributions, and that also came already to the fore for when the representative from the advisory committee spoke about the work ongoing. So truly thank you for all those different institutions and experts that have contributed. We are encouraged to see the advances made by the advisory committee in collaboration with the Ozone Secretariat in detailing what the different steps can be for developing a monitoring program. We find as such that the presented step-by-step approach is of interest, indeed allowing to build up, you could say, insights, and gradually over time deciding if they're worthwhile to make a more permanent monitoring station. From the replies given already today, what seems now very important to do as next steps is actually to reach out to existing facilities, which may provide some of the conditions that would allow to set up more easily such monitoring stations. And indeed, there was already a reference made by previous decisions. It's nice to hear that a number of parties are already indicating that they see that in their area there could be indeed an interest to develop such partnerships. We believe that it's very important as such that the advisory committee can thus continue its work. The reporting by the Secretariat refers indeed to two important possible funding streams. The MLF is considering funding options, and also the EU is indeed making efforts to mobilize further funding in this regard. Our Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency has informed the Secretariat of the availability of a non-competitive grant in the field of atmospheric monitoring of emission sources of ozone-depleting substances and F-gases under the main EU research program called Horizon Europe. And the Secretariat has indeed, in collaboration with the Advisory Committee, made a proposal to obtain this funding. But the evaluation of this proposal is still ongoing, and only when it's finalized, including the subsequent contractual finalization, only then would this funding stream become certain and available. This means that in the very short time, no additional sources from parties or other organizations, including the MLF, is immediately available. But given the importance of this work, we hope that it can continue. We believe that it would therefore be appropriate to continue to foresee the possibility to carry over some of the resources that we have foreseen last year into 2026. If the co-chairs would allow so, we would hope we can discuss this with the parties, but also other elements of relevance to the topic presented today. We think the presentation was very rich, and of course we hope we could do so with the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee being present. In this context, the EU is working on a draft CRP that would address a number of these elements, and I hope I can be able to present this soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, EU, and thank you in particular for suggesting a way forward with consideration of a CRP. I think that will be very helpful for the room. I turn now to China. You have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My delegation believes that this agenda item is of great significance. We thank the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee and the relevant experts. We highly appreciate the pilot project of the European Union and their input. We also express our deepest condolences to the loss of our colleague. Since the adoption of the Convention and the Protocol, SAP, or SAP, has carried out long-term research on atmospheric abundance of controlled substances, global emissions, and trend projections, providing essential scientific support for parties' decision-making. We also note that in recent years, the science community has conducted monitoring studies on a wide range of controlled substances at multiple scales, continuously verifying the effectiveness of the protocol and supporting the recovery of the ozone layer. The scientific input has laid a solid foundation for atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances and generated a wealth of useful data. Now, existing monitoring network-related practice have shown us that atmospheric monitoring is highly complex, requires precision, involves long-term implementation cycles, and demands systematic planning. As a non-binding obligation under the protocol, atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances is a new area of exploration, jointly undertaken by parties and relevant institutions. Its success depends on strong commitments from parties and the long-term cooperation among stakeholders. Therefore, a well-designed top structure is essential. This should include formulating long-term strategies, identifying priority tasks, setting phased objectives, and securing financial resources in order to guide the overall development of monitoring work under the protocol. And in planning the monitoring and analysis of the controlled substances, we emphasize the need to ensure sustainability. Before undertaking such work, parties should carefully consider the rational allocation and efficient use of available financial and technical resources, establish a full process quality control system covering project design, atmospheric sampling, sample analysis, and data reporting, and long-term performance evaluation mechanism to improve the accuracy and the traceability of the monitoring data and to support continuous optimization of the monitoring system. My delegation stands ready to engage in further discussions in contact groups. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, China. I turn now to Australia. I have 3 more countries on my list, and I'd like to close the list, please. Indonesia, Canada, Sierra Leone, and now the United States. Are there any more countries wishing to take the floor? Guinea? Okay, I'm going to close the list after Guinea. Thank you very much for that. Sorry to delay you, Australia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. As this is our first time taking the floor at this meeting, I would like to thank the government and people of Kenya for their warm welcome, and I would also like to acknowledge the work of the Ozone Secretariat in the preparation for this meeting and for ensuring its smooth running. And finally, I would like to acknowledge the co-chairs for their wisdom and guidance through this week. Thank you. Turning now to atmospheric monitoring, Australia notes with appreciation the updates provided by the Secretariat in relation to work on atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances being carried out by itself, the Advisory Committee, and the MLF, and for the very informative presentations we received today. We look forward to receiving the final report of the EU project being implemented in conjunction with the Ozone Secretariat, as it should include some valuable insights to inform further work being undertaken, both inside this forum and outside. Although we note several lessons have been learned, have already been provided. We also appreciate the expeditious work of the ExCom in moving forward with the direction provided by parties last year on it undertaking some pilot projects on regional atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances, and look forward to considering establishment of a funding window in 2026. We note the proposed 4-step process outlined in the document to establish monitoring of Montreal Protocol's controlled substances, which, while it will take a little longer than we were originally advised, we think given the great kind of insights we were informed of today in the presentation, I think we can be confident that it will give us a better and higher quality monitoring outcome when it's fully completed. We also are appreciative of the illustrations in Figure 2 of the addendum to the report, which provided us with a great deal of clarity about how the 3 main funding streams are envisaged to work together. And it kind of makes it very clear for us what the different interactions and timeframes for those funding streams are. In relation to, I guess, funding, we note the low expenditure of the Secretariat of the $400,000 allocated by parties last year to this work. And we would like to propose that once the EU grant is operationalised in 2026, the Secretariat finalise its drawdown of funding from the cash balance and use EU funding instead for future activities related to regional monitoring. And finally, in closing, Australia would like to express its, I guess, support for working with other parties, and we look forward to seeing the EU CRP on this matter. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Australia, for those reflections. I turn now to Indonesia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, Indonesia would like to express its sincere gratitude to the esteemed Secretariat for their excellent effort in organizing this meeting and for the government of Kenya for their warm hospitality. Indonesia expresses its appreciation for the comprehensive report and the ongoing effort to evaluate the establishment and funding of regional monitoring stations for controlled substances, including ODS and HFCs. We recognize their significance for countries hosting global or regional atmospheric monitoring facilities, particularly in regions with ODS and HFC production, where sustainability without reliance of the Vienna Trust Fund or the Montreal Protocol is a key criterion. Indonesia remains committed to playing a supportive role in advancing global effort to monitor ozone and control substances through the scientific contribution and atmospheric monitoring research conducted by the National Research and Innovation Agencies, we call BRIN. Indonesia continues to strengthen the scientific foundation and capacity in the Southeast Asia region. Notably, two proposals submitted by Indonesia and one proposal was approved at the 12th meeting of the Ozone Research Managers, underscoring our dedication to enhancing the regional and global data framework for ozone and ODS monitoring. Finally, we reaffirm our commitment to fostering collaboration and supporting the objective of the Montreal Protocol through scientific research and capacity building initiatives. Indonesia stands ready to contribute to the collective effort to ensure the sustainability and effectiveness of global monitoring system. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you very much, Indonesia. I now turn the floor to Canada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, and I reiterate my thanks to the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee for the update on actions taken to advance the work on atmospheric monitoring, and also want to thank the European Union for the current funding for the pilot projects, which generated a number of lessons learned that were really important in helping the Advisory Committee design, the next steps for the work. As well as for their contribution of 4.5 million euros to continue. And in that respect, it's hard not to think about Cornelius and the really fundamental role he played in spearheading this work for the EU and for the Montreal Protocol. And we'd like to join others in extending our condolences. We will miss him dearly. We also want to note that, as you mentioned, Madam Co-Chair, there are a number of countries that expressed interest in partnering with us for the location of sites, and it's good to think that already some countries are thinking about this and that they're well disposed to potentially host new atmospheric monitoring stations. Looking at what's being essentially presented to us in the Secretariat document, I think in principle we agree that, parties can move forward on the basis of the four-step process, also on the approach for the funding streams that's being proposed in the Secretariat document, and as well the costs that are being proposed. Of course, we're going to have to see with experience, whether we're going to need to adjust, a little bit as we move forward, because there's still a lot of unknowns, I think, that we're facing. But I think, as a start, all this seems to make sense to us. We agree with the European Union and Australia that some of the funding for the unused allocation of the cash balance of 400K could be allocated in 2026 to ensure that this work is not interrupted until the EU money becomes available. I'm not sure whether we need to discuss a specific amount, or, but we would want to have perhaps a little bit more discussion on, what is the work that would need to be done, and that would be supported over the coming months through this allocation. We note that the cost for the phase approach is proposed only for a 5-year period, and that's fine, but we think it's going to be important for parties to consider the ongoing operating costs of maintaining the stations over the longer term. Ideally, this long-term operating costs would be absorbed by the recipient countries, institutions, or some international organization other than the Montreal Protocol. However, in cases where this does not prove possible, the Secretariat has suggested that the MLF could be considered as a funding source for ongoing operating costs, and I think to some extent that could be possible, but that should not necessarily be sort of the primary source as we get started. But that is something that eventually, after a 5-year period, if there is no more money, that is something that we're willing to consider. I guess we have some questions on the next step, and we thank the EU for preparing a CRP. I guess when we're in the contact group, we can raise some of the more detailed questions we have on how we move forward. But just to give an idea of our questions, we have 10 potential sites that were identified by the advisory committee. But after looking at all the so-called essential needs for a successful station that were presented by Ravi, such as the infrastructure, the level of interest from the governments, others, and keeping in mind that some of them may need another Aussie, we heard. And then after the preliminary flash sampling, we may find that some of these sites are not suitable. So I guess for us, the question is, do we intend to still start work on the 10 sites, thinking that at the end of the day, some of them will not work out, so we want to make sure that, we have enough sites that on which we can build monitoring stations at the end of the day. And that also brings back to a question we had at the OEWG, ultimately, how many sites are we aiming for? So far, based on the Secretary's document, there's an assumption that, the EU grant would support 3 and the MLF would support 3, so that's 6 in total. That's something that we would want to have a little bit more discussion on. So anyways, we look forward, as I mentioned, to the UCRP and having further discussions, hopefully in a contact group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Canada, for those comments and thoughts. I turn now to Sierra Leone. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, let me start by also appreciating the people and government of Kenya as we are taking the floor for the very first time. And also to commend the European Union for investing their time and resources in this interesting research that was done. For the Ozone Secretariat, congratulations for always doing an effective planning and implementation of activities, especially the MOP and other things. Our delegation is concerned with the issue surrounding the research and future research that will be done, especially when it comes to fugitive emissions. We all know that research support decision-making and recognize that fact. And we call for future research work to take into consideration fugitive emissions. And we also want to ask that regional monitoring stations, especially like in the case of recognizing some of the new stations they want to establish in West Africa, be considered, because we want to see our true performance as we contribute towards the implementation of the Montreal Protocol. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sierra Leone. I turn the floor now to the United States. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair, and particular appreciation, as others have said, to the Advisory Committee and the Ozone Secretariat. I think overall we're actually quite pleased over how the last few meetings this work has really progressed, both inside this room, but I think also with the work of the Advisory Committee and the Ozone Secretariat to move this forward step by step. Just a few other reflections, and some of these have already been raised. I just begin by thanking the EU. I think this, the real commitment we see there and their efforts to work through this funding mechanism, which we know is not quite through the system yet. But I think this is a really helpful effort from the EU to help us advance our work here. So to express again our appreciation for that, and also for the work that they're doing on a draft CRP. Just to mention a few other things that we're thinking about in terms of how we think this needs to proceed. We would echo in a lot of ways the points that were just made by Canada with respect to thinking about the long-term sustainability of the sites that are selected. And I do think that involves a number of different aspects. Some of that involves the partner institution, and that's a question we had asked earlier, that would be, you'd be working with in country and at the monitoring location. Canada raised the question also of, I think realistically, we would be looking for sites where there was a clear, I would say, host country commitment on the financial side, as well as a long-term commitment of a hosting institution to provide resources to be able to help support the work beyond, for example, the 5-year duration of the EU funding. If and when that comes through, we would certainly prioritize sites that already have this existing infrastructure. I think it was quite noteworthy in the presentation that particularly for continuous monitoring, you get some pretty substantial cost savings. Well, actually in both cases, for flask sampling or continuous sampling, if you can rely on existing infrastructure, we reduce the burdens of costs, which I think also will considerably increase the chances that we will have a sustainable solution. We'll respond in more detail when we see the CRP posted, but just to note, the way we would probably think about the funding moving forward is we would be looking at finding some way at this meeting to designate what we would think of as a relatively small amount of bridge funding to carry the Secretariat beyond this meeting until really what we expect would be moving forward when the EU funding comes into place. I think we'll have to procedurally authorize that here. So happy to talk about what that could look like as well. And then just finally to say, we've also been quite pleased with some of the discussions in the multilateral fund at the executive committee. There's already been a fair amount of work that has done there. We have asked the Secretariat to provide some additional very specific documentation and information that I believe will come in at the 98th meeting next year for our consideration. So I do think sort of in parallel we have the work of this body, the advisory committee, the EU sort of finance mechanism, and the Secretariat here, as well as the multilateral fund, I think all sort of working in tandem to try to make incremental and step-by-step progress on this, and we're pleased to see that's happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, United States. Last but by no means least on my list is Guinea. You have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I would like to once again thank the Secretariat and the Advisory Committee, as well as the European Union. Turning to atmospheric monitoring, we're all certain that atmospheric ozone has a consequence for the temperature of the Earth. It absorbs ultraviolet light, which heats the Earth, and it also avoids warming in the troposphere. So as a consequence, the impact of the change in concentrations of ozone-depleting substances remains an issue. That is why it is a question of ensuring the sustainability of this project, and therefore my delegation would like to request that these stations be drawn up in order to ensure that they are able to guide us on the impact of the changes in concentration of ozone on the climate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guinea, for those final thoughts provided to the room. We are almost out of time this afternoon. We have blown our work plan. We are nowhere near our work plan. So I'm going to have to urge countries tomorrow to be very efficient in your interventions so we can try and get back on track and spend as much time as possible in contact groups. We note the proposal from the EU to bring forward a CRP. We would urge countries to work together with the EU as far as possible, either beforehand or in the context of a contact group, and to try and reflect as much as possible the many diverse views that have been expressed here today. There have been both positive affirmations of interest, lots of questions about funding and sustainability, but also, acknowledgement of the need of national level commitments, arrangements and partners to facilitate and contribute to this very important work. So we will suspend work on this agenda item until we see a CRP is available, and then we will come back to this issue in plenary. In the meantime, we will close our work for tonight. I'm just trying to check out and see the contact group listing for tonight. No surprise that we will be having a contact group meeting on the terms of reference for the replenishment study. It's going to be from 8:15 to, from 6:15 to 7:15 in CR1, which is the room across the way. That's right. Just one moment. So the contact group is scheduled to run for about an hour. I will leave it in the hands of the co-conveners to decide if they wish to extend that by a little bit, if they're making good progress on the CRP and trying to streamline it. So a little bit flexible on that time, but obviously not too flexible because delegates still need to eat. Tomorrow morning, it looks like we're having regional meetings. There has been a request for regional meetings tomorrow morning, but be warned that at some point we will not be able to prevent contact groups from being held in the mornings, and delegations and regional groups will need to be flexible in terms of being able to attend contact group meetings in the morning. That's right, and just to finalise the conveners for the contact group on the for the terms of reference is Ralph from the Netherlands and Azra from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So thank you very much for your patience. I see it's bang on 6 o'clock. So good evening and best wishes for the contact group and your evening entertainment. Thank you.